Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Teachers Tea Time podcast. My name is Mark and I hope you're doing well. This podcast is about, by, and for anyone who has ever had anything to do with schools and education. That's probably almost everybody. Topics and content in this podcast are listener generated. They come from listeners just like yourself. We are proud to be a member of Adjacent, a design collaborative made up of educators who dream of a better world for our students and their teachers. Learn more at adjacent.org. I have a mug of tea ready, so let's sit back, relax, and get on with the show. So last week's episode was well received. Chris's story is interesting, and the work he's doing now is groundbreaking. In today's episode, we're going to listen to the second part of our conversation. In it, we talk about the interdisciplinary approach he and his colleagues take to planning and organising learning. We hear some examples of the community connections that help shape the experiences of his students, how they deal with issues of standardisation and accreditation, and we also hear about how the iLab pivoted to the emergency learning of last spring.
So, because you have such a wide variety of people from multiple disciplines, can you describe how you might construct, say, a unit of work built around those learning expeditions and sort of tying, connecting subjects and different experiences together for the teachers too?
Yeah. So, one of the units that we did, this is it comes together, it's so organic, and this is another part that bonds us together because we all have different gifts and ideas. And so one example I'll give you is we had a marketing teacher, Ms. Sabo, who had a former student who came back to see her one day. And he was talking about how he was a police officer now at a university, and he was driving a Harley Davidson. And so he was going to come and be a community conversation for us and just talk about his path from high school to now working at the university. And we started talking to him about his Harley Davidson, and he started mentioning that this Harley Davidson group in our area had given the university the bike to use. And so just random thought like that just suddenly becomes a unit that we start working on. So he gets us in touch with Harley Davidson. We're talking about marketing, and we're thinking, all right, every one of our kids thinks that Harley Davidson is a bunch of rednecks that run around with Confederate flags or have long ponytails. And, a large number of our students are African Americans. And so they, like the idea of a Harley Davidson and them getting to know somebody that rides one, and even a police officer, it was just like so awesome. Like we were just like, man, we talk about breaking some barriers. We can really do that.
Oh, yeah.
And so we meet with the guy from Harley Davidson, and he comes in, and he's like a veteran from Afghanistan, and this guy is just wild. I mean, he's like talking about all the connections that they have at Harley Davidson and the speakers that he can give us who were in motorcycle gangs and all this stuff. And so we're just like, man, these kids are going to love this. So that's sort of just the idea is there for a couple of days. And then we just all bring it together to the table and say, how do we build learning around this? And so we start getting the kids to research Harley Davidson, and we look and see that the majority of Harley Davidson owners in our area in Hampton Roads are veterans. And so now we're like, all right, well, let's do a unit on war, and let's do a unit on veterans, and then we'll get Harley Davidson riding veterans to come up and talk to our kids. And then we start looking at Harley Davidson's history, and we see it's been around for so long, and it had connection to the wars, and the bikes were being used in the wars. And then we started looking at PTSD. And we started thinking about how Harley Davidson, why these guys ride and what's the purpose? Why do they ride their bikes? What does the bike mean to them, this idea of freedom? And then we started thinking about the marketing aspect and say, well, does Harley Davidson have a future? Because we're looking at their numbers, and their numbers were decreasing, and they had started off so strong in Milwaukee, and now they were talking about maybe moving towards an electric bike, which some people thought was just unacceptable for Harley Davidson to be electric. And so suddenly this unit is just taken off, and we're finding all the different ways that we can sort of bring it together. And we find literature, and we find, articles, and, the culminating part of the short unit, and it only lasted maybe, 2 or 3 weeks, was we took the kids to the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, and they, got to learn about Douglas MacArthur. And then they walk in, and of course, right in the, the centerpiece of the lobby is the old Harley Davidson that MacArthur used to ride. Then we get these veterans to come to Green Run on a Saturday, and they tell their war stories to our kids and their parents, and they talk about PTSD. And so there's all the emotional, sort of intelligence that's going on there. And the kids cook have a cookout with them. And then they bring their Harleys up, and we get permission, and our principal comes, and the kids get to ride the Harleys around the driver's ed parking lot. And so, it's just, that's sort of how organically we build learning around, what seemingly is random stuff, but that's what makes it's very exciting. I could give you another quick example if you want one too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so another one is like we have, and at different times, like that was for marketing. Like, it's like we got to make sure that each subject sort of has it, and then the other subjects wrap around that. So our English teacher, she might say, Chris, we're going to read this book. It's a classic. We're going to read this. And so I'm like, okay. So we decide, hey, we're going to read The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. And so, our environmental science and oceanography teacher, that's an easy fit for him. He's going to talk about marlins, and I'll talk about all this kind of stuff. The literature is there. But we start talking about, the social and emotional learning about Hemingway. And we find out that he's been married several times and that his kids have pretty rough lives. And so we start tapping into that. And the kids are really interested in learning about that. Our marketing teacher finds another, former student who's a charter boat captain. He comes in and he tells the kids about, being a charter boat captain. And he's, they do so well working with him that he says, hey, I'll take some of you guys out on a boat and let's see if we can catch a marlin. And so some of the kids go out fishing, and then we take all the kids fishing, and so that they can understand what it's like to reel in a fish. The geography, we start studying where Hemingway traveled in his lives. And so we take the geography and they study, Spain and Cuba and different parts of Europe that he went to. And so, that's sort of how we pull it all together. Then the government class comes in and looks at, fishing licenses and fishery policies and all that kind of stuff. So just an idea or a piece of literature, just boom, we all get our minds thinking about it, and then we just build learning from there, trying to tap into what we think kids will be interested in, and then we pull them into it as well. And so it's a really organic process that involves all of us and the students also.
So really it means you can't do the same thing twice.
Yeah, now that is true. So that's true. But sometimes, so now we're with the third year. And so the first 2 years we couldn't do anything over. So we had to keep reinventing ourselves. But now with the third group that came in with the freshmen, we were like, they haven't seen any of this stuff. So let's go back to the Holocaust unit that we did with the freshmen, because the kids said they really want to learn about Holocaust. Well, let's bring that back to the 9th graders this year. And so that was really cool. For the first time, we were able to use some of the things that we had done the first year, and we took the kids to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and it was nice because, we're so busy and working so hard, and to keep reinventing things over and over again is tough, but yeah, we were able to use some.
Yeah, it's definitely not for those folks who are still teaching the same worksheets they did 23 years ago, is it?
No, not at all.
So and one thing I was always impressed with when I visited classrooms was how much reading goes on. As much as you talk about it's fun, or we try and get the kids engaged, we're into their social emotional well-being, there's a strong academic line to what you do. The level of reading I saw in classrooms, the depth of reading, the responses students had. There's a lot of work done in getting them to do that, more so than I would say when I've compared other classes in that same school that are not in the iLab. So you keep that academic piece. How do you cope with, though, which is of course the elephant in the room? How do you cope with the things that are required of you? We've got standards, we have standardized tests up till now at least, and those pieces. And how have you managed to sort of get away with is the wrong word, but sort of manufacture that into your day-to-day existence?
Yeah, so we really felt like if we focused on reading and writing and speaking, those basic human skills and education, that stood the test of time from, the very beginning, that if the kids could do all that, then they would be fine on these SOL tests. These are supposed to be minimal standards that they can meet. And so we just told the kids right from the beginning. It was very tough the first year because the kids were coming in and, 4 months into school, they're like, don't we have SOL tests? How come we're not preparing for them? And we're like, you are preparing, but you're just not doing stupid stuff. You're not drill and kill, and you're not. And they started worrying, and they're just like, I just want to see. Can you give me a packet? Can you please just give me a packet? And we're like rolling our eyes. We're walking out of class sometimes, and we're just like, can you believe this? I mean, they have been so indoctrinated that this is what school is. This is so sad. And so we just said, we're going to take a risk. We're not going to do this. We are going to build learning around what their needs and wants are, and it'll all wash out in the end. Well, about a month before the SOL test, we all started getting the sweats, that first year. And we were just like, man, what happens if we have like a 20% pass rate? I mean, the iLab is going to be over. So we decided, here's what we'll do. The last month of before the SOL test, we just have to go back old school with them. And we will do what they want, the drill and kill, so that they can feel like they're going to pass the test, even if it's not really what we think it's going to do. So we did. So that for about 4 weeks, and because we had them for all the blocks, we were able to really just create sort of this intense study mode, test prep mode for about 4 weeks. And when they took the SOL test, in world geography, they did better than the school average. And then for biology, they did right at the school average. And we were pretty happy because we had even focused on that, and it's been the same since. Our test results have been either higher than the school average or just at the school average. And so we were able to sort of keep everybody at a distance who was in that world and focus 85% of the time on what we dreamed education could be, and 15% of the time still making sure we check the boxes so nobody's coming in and shutting us down.
Absolutely. And I think it's you said, it's like they've been so indoctrinated. A couple of episodes ago, I interviewed students who were really upset because we'd shut down the schools and they're having to do remote learning. But the 8th graders were really upset because they're about to take their writing SOL and they've been preparing for it, and now they weren't going to do it. And they saw that as detrimental to their education, just because of how they've been conditioned to think about how important these tests really are, when we know that they're actually not that important.
Right.
And so we play that game. So it was interesting that you had to fight that same experience. And so knowing that and moving forward, now we're in this weird situation where we're having to teach remotely in an emergency situation. I'm not going to call it online learning because it isn't really online learning. That takes time and forethought and planning and intentionality, and none of what we're doing right now is being done with that. But how has the iLab shifted to this new format?
Yeah, so I got to tell you, this has been probably our toughest struggle in some ways, because our lab is built so much around relationships and human connection, and it is so hard to facilitate that, through a computer. Luckily, we have all the kids' phone numbers and text messages, and we're always staying in touch that way. But it's been really tough, and our kids are struggling. I mean, because we know each other so much, some are willing to tell us what's going on in their families, and there's a lot of stuff happening. Our kids' families are essential workers, and some of our kids are essential workers, and things are happening drastically and fast with them. And others, because they know us so well, they don't want to share what's going on, because they just, they want to keep it to themselves, and so it's been strange. I mean, some of the kids who would be texting me all the time, asking me different questions, I'm reaching out to them and I can't get anything from them. And that's been bothering me a lot. Some of them who were traditionally hard to get, motivated and doing things, some of them are on it online. So there is definitely no generalization that I can make, because some are thriving in this environment and they're like, oh my God, I love sleeping in and I just get up and I do my work and this is wonderful. where others are just like, I have to see you guys. I don't even know how I'm going to make it without seeing you guys, because there's just such a deep connection there. So, we've been putting up the lessons in Schoology, and luckily for us, we've been using the Schoology platform for all the years of the iLab for the first 3 years. So the kids know exactly where to go to engage with the content. But, it's just not the same, man. I mean, it's just nowhere near close to it. And the only thing that I would say that has been incredibly successful and surprisingly successful in this so far has been the one-on-one conferences that we've been doing with students, because we never have the time to do it adequately in school, and it's so powerful. I'll give you one example. I have a student who's autistic, and when he first came into the iLab, he was very confrontational, did not like to talk to people. Anytime he talked to people, it was a confrontation. And he's worked out so much, and he's super bright. I mean, crazy smart about some of the things that he loves. He loves, airplanes and trains, and he knows everything about it. And so he's just, because of the powerful relationships that we have and his openness to change and to focus, I mean, it's been so great. And I was really worried about him with this transition out of school, because I was just like, man, I need to see him every day. And so we started conferencing, the first week. And basically we've been conferencing every day or every other day since, March 13th. And he and I have started with the things he loves, with trains, and have just each day we just move and build learning around what he's interested in. And it's been incredible. I mean, the journey that he and I have taken over the last, 40 something days, I mean, it's moving, man. I mean, we started with, I'm sharing my screen with him, and I know he loves trains, so we start tracking the Amtrak train systems going all around the country. Then we start focusing on historical tracks that are laid dormant. And then he's trying to he really has become the teacher in a lot of ways. He's teaching me about the different engines that, have existed throughout time, steam engine versus whatever. Then he starts telling me he's learning to play the harmonica. So I get a harmonica, and now he and I are trying to learn how to play the harmonica. And now we're looking up, everything from 1930s Depression era harmonica songs to me trying to tell him about Blues Traveler, in a modern band. And, and then, we switched to roller coasters, and then we switched to planes, and a lot of it is about transportation, but it's been incredible. And he would never have gotten this experience without the pandemic. I mean, he's getting a nurturing environment, but this one-on-one with him, I mean, it's been incredible. It's been one of the most amazing experiences that I've had as an educator. And when we meet with the other kids, 2 or 3 at a time in the conferences, you can tell they like it too. I mean, just seeing your face and the smiles, it makes a huge difference.
That's awesome. So I remember one of the cool bits of data that came out after the first couple of years of the Innovations Lab was that attendance was really high with those students. And some of these students were previously poor school attenders. And so my thought was, you're getting to conference sort of with them in small numbers. Now, is there any sort of trend in how they're seeing this as detrimental because they can't come to school anymore? And if that's the case, that's probably a good thing because you've transformed them into people who want to be at school.
Yeah, I mean that's the crazy part. It's like the text message that we've gotten the most. The 2 text messages that we've gotten the most over the last 45 days are, I can't believe I'm saying this to you, Mr. Jacobs, but I love school and I miss school. When we did their original, polls and stuff, when they were first coming in, they're like, tell me your greatest thought about education. And they're like, I hate school. I mean, it was just, And then the second text message is, I love sleeping in. Mm-hmm. So those are the 2 things that we're seeing. They love creating their own schedule and sleeping in, and they miss us the school environment for sure. And that is a testimony to what the teachers and the students have done for sure.
As I'm putting this podcast together, I think we should note that the school system where the iLab is located has started its school year remotely and in a slightly different model than that adopted in the spring. If you want to know how they're coping with this new model in these exceptional circumstances, or if you want to know more about the iLab, you can follow the official Twitter account at GRHSiLab. Or if you want to know more about Chris's work, you can follow him on Twitter at ChrisJacobsGRHS. I'm going to have those addresses in the show notes. In the next episode, we'll learn more about the iLab and what the future looks like for innovative models like this one. But until then, that was episode 12 of the Teachers Tea Time podcast. This podcast is a member of Adjacent, a design collaborative made up of educators who dream of a better world for our students and their teachers. We create, write, talk, teach, and learn about the things that matter most in education. To find out more, point your browser to www.adjacent.org. That's www.edjacent.org. For me, it's the stories of teachers, students, and school communities that matter. As such, this podcast is only possible with the help and support of its listeners. Please leave positive reviews wherever you are able. If you're an iTunes or Spotify subscriber, leaving a good review can really help our visibility. Also, please don't keep this podcast to yourself. Tell your friends to subscribe and listen too. One thing we all have in common is that we've all been to school. So if you'd like to contribute to the pod in any way, if you have a story to share, long, short, tragic, or comic, if you have comments to make about the podcast, or just want to say hi, you can send an email to teachersteatimepod@gmail.com. I love to read what you have to say. Or if social media is your thing, you can follow me on Twitter at Mark Diakop and on Instagram as Mark Diakopoulos. You can find suggestions for topics, copies of the show notes, and you can download previous episodes of the podcast at www.teachersteatimepod.com. The podcast artwork was created by Phaedra. Opening and closing music is by Bryan Boyko. It's been my pleasure to be your host today. Thank you for listening.